hold on. I gotta close my little view. All right, that's fine.
Oh, you have to record through the Zoom? We can't record it on the other end?
I think Twitch.
I am recording it, but
Okay.
it's always good to have just basically two recordings.
Backup, yeah. Okay.
Hold on, I gotta close everything else. I'm getting like Slack uh, Slack notifications that I don't need. Okay, I'm gonna hit record. Oh no, Ishan, I can't record because you're the host.
Oh, okay, it's fine. Then I've started recording.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I started recording on my end, so it's okay.
Okay, well, let's start streaming.
All right.
Okay, hi.
Oh. Okay, it started streaming. It's going to take, you're on.
Okay. Hi, class. Can someone on Twitch confirm in the chat that you can hear us? Ishan is doing some testing of the technology.
Yeah, just give it a sec. It says streaming, so yes, everyone can hear you. We're good to go.
Okay, great.
Yay!
All right.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay. I think we're ready to get started. So just want to introduce this. So this is going out on the Twitch, which people can see if they're not in the architectural representation course. So I'm going to give a brief intro. So this is a part of a series of conversations that we've organized. Ellie, Abrons, and myself are co-coordinating across 2 semesters the Architecture 516 course, which is a required course on representation for all Master of Architecture students. And as part of that course, we've invited people in, both colleagues and outside guests, to talk about the issues of media, subjectivity, scenography, and representation in contemporary architecture. And so the teaching team, it's me and Ellie, as I noted. This semester, Peter Hallquist and Catherine Griffiths are teaching sections. And like I mentioned, I'm coordinating. And I just want to make sure Ishan in the background here, who's part of the academic initiatives team, is DJing this whole event and has put it all together. So I really want to give him a great thanks for all of that. So with us today, is Anya Sirota, and she is an associate professor here at Taubman College. She's also the Associate Dean of Academic Innovation. Is that right, Anya?
It's initiatives, not innovation.
Initiatives, right. I knew I was going to get that wrong. So many times. She's also the principal of Akawaki with Jean-Louis Farge. And we're going to see some of their work in this presentation. Before she came to architecture, she studied media and worked in television production, which I think is an important biographical note to understand the things we're going to see and talk about today. And so the things we're going to talk about today are informed both by her work and by the reading that all the students did for this week, which was a piece by Foucault about power and subject formation. So the structure of this conversation is going to be pretty loose. We're going to go through a series of scenes where we're going to be placed in different contexts that will prompt different conversations about the work and about the reading and about the issues of the course. To give some context for the conversation, the students right now are working on a 4-week project where they're being asked to design a Zoom background for themselves. It's a video background that will selectively reveal and construct their identity based on the workspace that surrounds them and how they want to present themselves when they are forced to kind of reveal parts of their private life in their professional life as students. And so, I think the issues of your work, Anya, and Foucault, the reading by Foucault especially, are going to be super helpful in the students' thinking on this, and hopefully bring a kind of help to bring a more critical eye to the way that we appear on screen and view others appearing on screens in this weird moment of mediated socialization. So, Ellie, do you have anything to add before we jump in?
No, well, I wondered, are you going to introduce where we're standing?
Oh yes, well that's like,
Or yeah, are we ready to do that, or do you want to have other things first?
so right now we're milling about in, this is on Hollywood Boulevard, right? And
Yeah, that's where we are.
Hollywood Boulevard in 2010, I believe. And I think important, this is a project that Anya did inside the gallery, but I think importantly, we're starting outside the gallery, because this is the first piece of work I ever encountered that Anya did. And I remember just being so struck by how smart it was and how much it understood about architecture's role in the world and in media, and even like the role that gallery production like had already taken on in art, in architectural production. So I love that this image is outside. We don't start inside, we start outside, and so the scene around the gallery scene is something I think that you've been conscious of, and I don't think I've ever seen project you've done where there isn't a photograph of the people milling around, outside or around. So just want to acknowledge that. But I think the power of this project really comes through when we go inside. So Ishan, can we go inside?
Wait! Don't go inside yet.
Yeah.
Well, I just was wondering, maybe it would be worth describing the project for a minute, if it's not instantly clear from this photograph what's going on. But also because I think that the kind of life of the project, which anticipates its dissemination in other formats and other medias, it probably resides equally out here as it does in there, if that makes any sense. Like,
yeah.
Right? So maybe Anya, do you want to describe what's happening behind us in this gallery?
Yeah, we're outside of the gallery. I just have to describe 2010 really briefly, like very briefly, because so I graduated as an elderly person from graduate school in 2008, and in 2006, Mark Zuckerberg, whatever, he had just invented some form of Facebook at Harvard so that people could date each other and not accidentally date people outside of Harvard. Just, I remember that being something that was in the air. So this is a project that's really at the beginning of social media dissemination as a mode of public discourse and identity building. And we were invited to do an installation, or really some sort of a commentary on pop representation in architecture at the WUHO Gallery that's on Hollywood Boulevard. And I'd never been to this neighborhood before. I'd never been to Los Angeles at that point. And I just felt with our team like, oh man, like it's gonna be really hard to one up this urban scenography that's already happening and that illustrates how popular culture just has it on us, like surpasses architectural representation in every way in its capacity to capture the popular imagination. And what could we possibly do on a micro budget that can coexist with the red carpet moments and with the star-studded gala events that happen on the street? So I think at this point we were operating with maybe $2,000 or $3,000, which meant a hell of a lot of plywood. And we wanted to pay homage to the place, to the fact that there are stars, but we also wanted to situate the audience's subjectivity and to illustrate how the pleasure of the gallery experience is really about to be looked atness rather than looking at others. And acting as the scale figure is the pleasure of populating things like this in places like this. So we used a bunch of slices of plywood. We projected stars on a sphere. We created conical shapes out of those projections. We Boolean them out of the plywood. This was a phase where we were still testing phenomenological ideas. So all of the plywood pieces are 7 degrees kinked in plan and section just to make you really queasy. And then people were allowed to move through these and populate the slices of stardom while photographing themselves and being encouraged to disseminate their self-image on social media. That's the project. And it was called Beta Movement because we were really into sort of psychotropic effects at that point.
Awesome.
I'm glad we actually set it up before we go in. So now we're gonna go in. So Ishan, can you take us in? Okay, here we are. So yeah, I just want to point out something you said, which is important. But I think is like I said, I think you were the first person I knew who was doing this, which is like this was to produce images, specifically images that would circulate on the internet and through social media. But it was a space that was, of course, meant to be, experienced. Like you could walk through it. It could make you queasy. But in the end, I mean, the way you documented it was the people documenting themselves in it. This this tripped out black and white super graphic star image that they could slide in and out of. And now like what Ellie and I are doing and what you're doing, these are real things that people could do in the space. You could layer yourself where you wanted. You could take a photograph of yourself with people being obscure. Like we're doing this digitally, but you did it physically. I mean, that's another layer of it. In a like the digital layering of Photoshop was something that you brought into space and people could play around with it by moving around.
Yeah, but I wasn't that big in the image. Like you couldn't be this big.
No, I know.
You're the right scale.
Well, I encourage students too to go on your website and check out the images of people in this space. I mean, they're pretty fantastic. And what's funny too is that I couldn't find one without someone in it, so I just had to use content aware fill on this Photoshop thing, and it kind of messed it up because I could not get my head around the way it actually works geometrically, so I gave up and just used Photoshop.
But I think, I mean, one of the things that's so fascinating about this project, I think, Anya, is how prescient it was. And that like, I mean, I think, of course, we always have understood that architecture exists, as itself physically in the world, but also as a mediated representation. And I think architects have thought about what that means, but to actually produce a project that, like anticipates that and takes it on. And then if we fast forward a decade and you have things like Meow Wolf or the Museum of Ice Cream, right? You have like multi-million-dollar enterprises that are primarily organized around producing this kind of experience, which like doubles as like the kind of phenomenological one you were describing, like one which acts on your senses in real time and space, but is meant always to be like represented later in some other format, often on a small screen. So I wondered, like that kind of, the ideas about mediation, is that something you continued to think about in your work as the years have gone by, a decade later?
As the years have gone by.
Years. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
also elderly in 2008, so it's okay.
No, but as this being our first project, really our first build work out of school, we were trying to supplant representation with documentation, because from the get-go we were trying to figure out how we could remove the heroicism of the architectural vision and replace it with an exuberant populism of self-representation and self-negotiation and self-mediation of the image, so that the plethora of subjectivities produce the narrative rather than the single designer or the visionary. So that was what we were, I mean, we referred to this, lovingly as the selfie-maton. We didn't think that people would continue taking selfies without us. We really thought that this would sort of like, seal the deal on how self-reflective and weird that process was. But yeah, this was really a way to say that the user, the people who populate the things we make, they're the ones that produce the ultimate narratives rather than the predicted narrative of the visionary designer. Yeah, but at the same time, like it's really a farce because like the subjectivity is built in a very precise and particular formalist way that can only be inhabited in so many in so many perspectives and can only produce the same image again and again with different scale figures. So even there's always this kind of uh, difficult reality between what the project attempts to do in terms of its liberating aspirations and still the hegemony of formalism in what it produces.
Hmm. No, I think that's interesting because like that's always struck me about your practice too. Is there's a kind of optimism to it when it comes to subject formation and self-presentation, let's say. And I was struck by most of the students' responses to the Foucault was much more the opposite. Basically, how are we made subjects? And what are the power structures that produce those forms of subjectivity? Maybe how we, in the role of the architect, can play a role or not in that type of subject formation power relationship. But I've always felt in your work there's a kind of optimistic, almost empowering attitude about how well we can do that ourselves. Like one sidestep that or to aim it, that we can control our own subject formation. I mean, is that it seems like that's something that kind of runs through your work.
I think secretly it still does.
Yeah.
We've never given up because, like the structuralists, they're really depressing because they're so relativist and there are so many powers and forces that are acting on our subjectivity and on our identity formation that in the end, it's difficult to liberate ourselves from all of the social, political predispositions that precede us, and even the language that quaffs and curates our consciousness. But in everything that we've done, we've always tried to render explicit where power is coming from, in the sense that if you understand how it's constructed and what its trickery is, then you can set yourself free, perhaps, even momentarily, uh, through collective experience or collective action. So even in a playful, cheesy project like this, once people made their way through the series of slices, they encountered all kinds of videos and documents that explained clearly what they had just experienced and how their subjectivity was built. So there's never a moment where the strategy and the tactic behind how things are made is not unpacked for everyone participating.
Yeah, that's nice. I think in comedy they call that popping the bubble, or
Oh,
like pop the bubble. You can't leave someone in the constructed reality. It's kind of cruel and
yeah,
ungenerous.
exactly. It's only fun when you begin to really participate in knowingly in what the scenographic construct offers you.
Right.
I mean, what I think is also really promising about that is that so you were saying like, oh, well, the kind of formal structures of this piece limit the possibility. But when you reveal that construction, then you take this with you out into the world and you start to understand those constructions in other contexts, right? So it's not kind of like limited to this environment. It becomes, I don't know, a kind of lens that you can use to deconstruct other things.
That's our hope. Yeah.
Hey, Sean, can we move to the next scene? Okay. So, speaking of taking things with you, just to introduce this, Anya, I'll let you introduce as much or as little as you want about each image. But this is a still from a video that was made as part of the Situation Studio, which many of you may will have taken. The 3Gs in the audience right now. Lida Aguirre now coordinates it. The coordinators over the years have included me, Meredith Miller, and Anya. And the first year that it was taught, it was kind of instigated by then Chair John McMurray.
Yeah.
And Anya to coordinate, and me and Anya and Meredith and Tamon Evans, who's no longer teaching here, to make a studio about just situation rather than form, about the way things happen in space, you know, the way that architecture appears as images and activities and affects rather than kind of, you know, the geometrically delineated forms that we're all very familiar with from architecture pedagogy. And so it evolved over the years. This is about midway through your tenure, I think, Anya, was the work. And so, you know, I just want to bring this up because I think, you know, being part of a teaching team with you and Mary, like something we realized along the way was just how, you know, how much of even architectural production in architecture school ends up being scenographic and only to produce images, even for one's portfolio, not necessarily even for, you know, the internet or for social media. And
Yeah.
just that focus that, you know, that increased focus on image production over the years was something, you know, I think that I think students benefited from, but I think also the culture of Taubman College benefited from, frankly. Like I think you've had a kind of outsized influence on a lot of the curriculum that or the curricula that happen and the focus on this kind of very considered deliberate image making and the role that the scenographic can play in image making, especially right now. So I don't know if I did an adequate job in
And
the situation.
is that why there's two Anyas and they're both very large?
Because they're outsized.
Because you have an outsized influence, yeah.
That's the nicest thing I've ever heard.
Oh,
I mean,
Oh,
about teaching at the school. So I'm glad this is being recorded. Like on a dreary day, I'm gonna watch this again.
I think it's true. I don't know if it, I don't even know. I mean, I don't want to get too insidery for the sake of the students, but I don't even think it happened in a completely straight path. You know, it was a kind of winding path through the faculty and through the students and from, you know, working with you to students to another studio. Like, I think this kind of thinking is definitely just like soaked into the college. And I think it's been a really good thing. I think it's made I think it's helped give Taubman College an identity as an architecture school.
Wow. Okay, now like I don't know if you can see it because I'm overscaled and oversized, but I am blushing now. But I just, you know, with this Situation Studio, I remember an instigation from John McMorrow. And I think you were in this meeting and so was Meredith. And the question that was being posed, like, what do we do with program once we've exhausted the program bubble diagram and we no longer believe in the kind of OMA relational section diagram as the driver for how we make decisions and how we instigate human activity? Where do we go from here? And that was such a fresh question for me at that point in the career. And I was so excited to work with all of you on thinking, what the heck are we going to do in terms of being able to quaff and curate and discuss the strange effects that architecture can have on human activity and how we trace, discuss them, but also we don't predict those effects. We just create opportunities for discussing the plethora of possibilities that certain scenographic constructs instigate. That was exciting because once again, you can't nail the subjectivity of the user. You can only begin to track and map the options possible, but you assume that there's some level of appropriation that's going to happen that will give liberating effects. That was exciting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I remember about this time is that, you know, it's when the word vibe really became the way in which you would describe, not you, but the studio and then therefore trickle down the rest of us would start to describe something like effects, because, you know, in that move away from the kind of phenomenological idea that you actually, you know, had an idea of a singular subject, an ideal subject and you would craft a particular experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
This says, well, we can't do that. The subjectivity we don't control, but the vibe maybe we can control, and we can agree, right? That like the vibe is somehow both specific and very multiplicitous, right? At the same time. And that is it's a word that, I mean, is still used all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think of its origin in this set of studios that the both of you taught. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not an infinite field of possibility.
Right.
There's still the vibe creates certain tracks of opportunity, but then can't predict the level of appropriation that will happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was the
Yeah. So like this scene, if we just take this scene that we're in right now and think like you and I would probably experience this environment really differently, but the vibe is the vibe. Like it's, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I would have total control.
I was saying I still remember some of the moves from the dance, and I think this is one of the opening moves that the human in the center does. They had some great choreography.
Oh my God, they worked on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe to give some context for the students too, this was like a 10-day project where each studio section worked together to produce a workout video, not a music video, a workout video. So it required a relationship between human bodies, like movement, space, color, the space of the screen, space of the set. They had to design and produce all their own sets and costumes and props and shoot it and edit it. And, so I think that, on one level, pedagogically, it just introduces them to a bunch of skills all at once. It also introduces students to a kind of collaboration and like quick decision making, intuitive, just creative decision making. But I think also important to the situation studio and something we're trying to do in the rep class this year is to make the connection between architecture and larger visual culture. I think like we really were trying to get students to look outside of architecture for cues about how architecture could appear or look, what conversations it could be in with, what people it could reach that went beyond, the architecture community. I mean, fast forward, I guess, about 4 or 5 years from this moment to the present, and that just seems obvious, right? Like it doesn't seem like a particularly interesting claim to say architecture participates in broader visual culture. That's just kind of what it does because of things like Instagram and now we're on Twitch right now. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that. Like, do you think a lot's changed in the last 5 years with respect to architecture's relationship to visual culture?
I think that the Academy has a little ways to catch up. I think that yes, architecture as a broad field has begun to participate more directly with other creative fields, with fashion, with music. It's become a clear consumer item. But I also think that the Academy has been a little slow to accept and to celebrate and support work that doesn't clearly track with architectural precedent. So I think there's a little bit of a gap. There's something that we can do to catch up. There's a fear of peeling too far away from disciplinarity as we understand it. And I think it's also a barrier to being able to create more empathy toward our field in early education. So I think we're going to get there. I think that there are lots of ways to experiment, but I think in terms of representation, we've still geared heavily toward communicating with ourselves rather than with a broad popular audience and ensuring that we create tools that are legible toward others.
Mm-hmm. Well, this might actually be a perfect segue to the next scene, Vishon. Take us there.
Oh.
Oh, wait. I forgot about Foucault's library.
Yeah.
A transition mothership, but let's take a stop at Foucault's library. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to just talk about why Foucault now. You and I had a conversation. No, because I think it's completely relevant. And I think as as one of the things that started you along your journey on these issues, it's super relevant. And I think it's helped produce the kinds of ideas and the context in which we're working now. But tell us about Foucault. Like, why did the students read Foucault this week?
Yeah, so Foucault. First of all, you're reading something from the 80s. That's kind of embarrassing to me. Like, oh my God, I'm still, I'm wearing my sweater from the 80s. I'm reading Foucault from the 80s. This is kind of dated stuff. But simultaneously, I think we haven't resolved many of the issues theoretically that he brought up that seem very pertinent and contemporary today to me, which is identifying where power comes from and how it operates on us as subjects, and what are we supposed to do about it. This is the first time in a very long time where I felt such clear cultural agonism in our school, in our society, in this country, globally. And the question of what to do to resist the sentiment of oppression and to participate in anti-authoritarian struggle is clearly at the forefront of how we're teaching and participating in civil society. And I think one of the things that still is fresh and striking to me about Foucault is that he both uses binary oppositions to make sense of the world, but he also undercuts the notion that there are clear oppositions between power and the individual, and allows us to understand that we both build our identity and participate in larger society and contribute to those systems of oppression. So I think, he's weighing in on questions of communication, of collective reciprocity, on the production of meaning. All of those things seem incredibly important right now, especially in a time where the complexity of certain terms seem to be diminished by the platforms, by social platforms, and our modes of communication that are preceded by a hashtag. So for me, he's just a reminder of the depth of and complexity when we produce tricky combinations between individualization and totalizing processes and powers, and try to make sense of what we are supposed to do with all of that. Wow, I don't know.
That was amazing.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about just how different teaching in 2018 was versus teaching in 2020 versus teaching in 2015. Just, talking to my colleagues about the issues that are important to students, like these issues are all, have always been underneath a lot of the work that a lot of people do in architecture. But, going back to, let's say, 2010, to the beta movement, there's some fun there, like there's some cynical like observations about mediation of one's own image, but also like some fun. It almost seems like tone deaf to be fun now, like the looking at that situation image, it's like, oh man, I don't know, like I don't know if that would be the right way to approach these issues right now. So it's interesting, yeah, to go back to the source material from the 80s. I think it's a kind of smart way to think about it, is like there's been so much layered on top of that between then and now that, yeah, maybe, that's the point of the humanities, right? Is to go back and make sure we didn't miss anything,
I definitely agree with you, Tom, that we're not going to be able to have the same kind of fun, and that in the current scenario, playfulness does not seem to be the appropriate response to the gravitas of our cultural moment.
Right.
That said, what I would still take away from these kinds of critical readings from the 80s and 90s is that the definition of who is oppressing us and who is defining our identities is unstable. And so it isn't as simple as that to be able to identify the oppressor and to challenge the activities of the oppressor. And so as an architect, it's not so clear that even with our best intentions, we do good.
Mm.
And that's something that's always been a kind of undercurrent, regardless of how much pseudo fun or playfulness we were attempting to disseminate in order to change public perception about a place or a context or a group of people or the capital flux of things. There was always a deep cognizance that we, regardless of what we were attempting to do, were not necessarily doing public good, that we weren't necessarily contributing to a robust democracy. And, you know, there's so many gradients of impact and so many different ways to read a particular context and the people that inflect it. And for me, Foucault is still really, really there, requiring us to think critically and astutely about who we are, what identity we adapt, what are the self-reflexive ways that we think about that construction of identity, and how we contribute to collectivity and its potential oppression of others.
I feel like there's like this, we have to acknowledge the kind of convergence, like in this class, in this image, in what you're saying, between the kind of say constantly fluctuating sites of power, identity formation, digital production, and like ubiquitous networked life, right? Because like so much of our identity, and also like the funny thing is we're in this image of this incredible library, but so much of our identities now are actually formed online or formed by technology or software or internet companies, right? So like Google has identified each one of us as fitting X, you know, myriad different kind of demographic categories that they assign to us, not because we declare them, but because based on our search histories and on our shopping habits and on our location data, they've decided that these are the people that we are. And to a certain extent, right, it's like invisible to us. And maybe one could argue like doesn't really affect us, but I think is like so important. This idea that, you know, maybe the thing we thought, even if it was a ruse, the thing we thought we had control over forming for ourselves and expressing in a certain way, I think now is actually shared. We have part of it, but part of it is now actually determined for us in this kind of black box that we don't have access to.
Yeah.
So I just was thinking about that in relationship to like not, you know, understanding or acknowledging always that it's hard to see sites of power or power relationships, you know, they aren't always obvious.
Yeah.
And it isn't always clear how to work on them. I don't think, I mean, I think for architecture, it's, you know, it will forever be the question, how to work on that.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I really appreciate what you're saying, Ellie, because I think this is, for me, the difficulty and complexity in every way of our current moment. It's very tough for us to truly understand our adversaries and the complicities and ironies of the kind of the layers of structural inequity that shapes our lives. But, you know, I've been struck in the last, you know, few months. There's been a lot of conversation about, for example, decolonizing our education, decolonizing our identities, our minds, our relationship to culture, civilization, and capital. And as these, as the movement to kind of decolonize our understanding of the world and its power dynamics have risen to the forefront of popular discourse, simultaneously there's been, you know, for example, a celebration of one of the most rudimentary and explicit colonial moments I've ever experienced as an adult, when Musk and the, what is this, electric car company shot, you know, private missiles into space, literally colonizing space in order to completely corporatize data dissemination in the future. And so we let that go. We didn't, I didn't see people in the streets saying, decolonize space. There was a moment where it was celebratory, like, it's amazing. Elon has gotten this like giant private rocket into space, and that's wonderful. That's progress. And so there are all of these really strange, dissonant conditions that are happening, both in real time and conceptually as a culture. Anyway,
Yeah.
we'll have to read some of those books in his library to make sense of it.
Yeah. Side note, you should talk to Charmin, who just blew my mind. Chapter in his new book is about exactly this. So you should, anyway, connect with him. He's got a lot of thoughts on that. Before we move on to the next scene, I just wanted to point out, I mean, I studied philosophy as well as architecture as an undergrad. The thing that always struck me about Foucault is how well he controlled his image. Like,
Yeah.
find a portrait of him that isn't either like a close-up, like he made himself into an iconic image. He's almost always photographed in front of a wall of books. He rarely looks at the camera. He was someone who crafted an image, as a philosopher. Like, he was a very self-consciously public personality. It's very, very media savvy, it seems. So,
True.
anyway, Ishan, can we go to the next scene?
Oh boy, there we are.
This is where it all comes together. I think like the last 5 scenes we can talk about with the mothership. Do you want to introduce the students to this project, Anya?
I'll try. This is quite the project. This was in 2016. This is a 4-year-old project where we were working in the North End in Detroit with a very small grant from the Knight Foundation. And we were working with a group of artists and residents trying to figure out how to tell the story of place. And so we participated in a number of community engagement exercises and meetings. And what we discovered about the North End was that in many ways, this was the cradle of funk in Detroit. That George Clinton had, he had a gig on Oakland Avenue, which is the main thoroughfare. And at the Phelps Lounge, where he had a 3-day gig, he had transformed into Dr. Funkenstein. So this project was about paying homage to that history, but without lament or nostalgia. So we didn't want any plaques. We didn't want to talk about the vanguard music spaces and architecture that was lost. We didn't want to talk directly about the aggressions of blight remediation. It's dusty in here, yeah. But we did want to tell the story that in this neighborhood, funk music was born, and that the blue-collar working class musicians that produced that vanguard sound were still operating in the neighborhood. And so there was still talent and culture and possibility. And we wanted to disseminate an image that would tell that story, even though the physical landscape of the North End neighborhood was really damaged by capital extraction and by redlining. So we connected with a number of musicians that had once played with P-Funk or had continued playing with them. And we contacted actually George Clinton to request permission if we could rebuild another spaceship, another mothership. This was a kind of scenographic prop that George Clinton had used on the stage. When he would appear, he would literally land in a spaceship, open it up, there'd be all kinds of smoke and special effects, and he would roll out and people would go wild. So we built an updated version of it. We tried to stay as kind of psychedelic and true to form as possible, but update it by building it out of aluminum sheets that could fit into our truck. Sorry, so it would be easy to transport. And we launched it in an unmarked garage with the musicians from P-Funk, and 700 people showed up. And so this was kind of the beginning of a longer urban scale project that was called 1 Mile, or the Oakland North End Mile Project, which attempted to pay homage to the idea that before there was 8 Mile, there was an origin story. And that origin story was in the North End. And this is where the kind of popular sound came from. So this was an urban marker and a DJ booth, and we would fly it around literally by unpacking it and packing it back together to different sites in the neighborhood and throw, for lack of a better, throw parties. Yeah, we would throw parties and concerts and use a lot of smoke machines. Is that good? That's enough information?
That's great.
No, it's great.
Okay, and it's designed using basically like car customization materials. So it's like blinged out and pimped out with vinyl and very, very inexpensive, but vernacular materials.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it speaks to one of your ambitions, or just something you kind of cited earlier, in that academia is very slow to actually include different audiences
Mhm.
in architectural production. And we might make media that participates in broader visual culture, but it's still ultimately for other architects, or it stays within academia. But I think that's what is important about this project, is that it interfaced with an audience that already existed, a community that already existed, and it kind of broadened it. I mean, having seen photographs and attended some of the parties that you're referencing, it definitely got beyond the architecture insider crowd, to be sure.
To be sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really complex. Just to come back to questions of identity, this is an extremely complex project for us because what right, do we have to create representations that are outside of our intimate cultural circle? Could we accuse this project of being a form of cultural appropriation? Perhaps it's possible. How do we ensure, for example, as architects, that there isn't a sentiment of extraction associated with a project like this, where we're literally when we begin to cite and use precedents that are outside of our disciplinary bounds and point to, 1970s music culture in Detroit and cull aesthetic practices from that, where do we find ourselves and how do we make sense of it? For us, that, to return to Situation Studio in many ways, for us, programming has always been the bridge between cultivating a broader audience for the work, but also ensuring that we include a plethora of people, creatives, artists that give the object meaning outside of its aesthetic configuration. So I think this thing is an object never operated without program, without musicians, DJs, and artists actually giving it further signification.
Well, also, I mean, isn't there an idea about co-authorship embedded in the object? Like there was some collaborative, I don't want to say it was collaboratively designed necessarily, but it was like a kind of iterative process where you had other people involved.
Well, we definitely, I know that there's this term co-creation and co-authorship that's very popular currently. I actually never use it because I do think that we as architects bring very specific disciplinary knowledge and capacity to a project like this. But it's impossible to get it right without feedback mechanisms. So we definitely worked with the musicians as we iterated. We ran, we worked very hard, for example, to get the color gold right. So it would be the right level of bling, not too much, not too little. So we worked with people who gave us extraordinary feedback, without whom this wouldn't be possible. But to say that this was a co-created object, not so much. Co-created program, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think it also it raises an interesting question. Well, you started by your sorry, in describing the project, you began by saying that it was one that was trying to seek like how to tell the story of a place. Maybe those aren't your exact words, but something along those lines.
That's basically.
And I'm wondering, it kind of makes me think like another question that follows out of that then, if we're kind of focusing just on this object, which I understand, I've always understood this object to exist in a kind of cloud of other things, programming, but also other objects eventually, right? So, but it maybe makes me think that the follow-on question would be like, who is it for? You know, like, is it possible that the object can be both for you and your creative practice and for this place that you are giving the object, not giving the object to, but maybe intending the object, you know, to participate in that place. And it seems like if we, as architects, if we asked ourselves that question more often, like, who is it for? The thing that I'm creating or working on or in conversation around, that it would, I think, like positively influence the way in which we understand our work and what it does in the world.
Yeah, but it's interesting too, because the question we always ask ourselves is to what end? You know, the object, like a shiny object and throw a party, that's fun. And it definitely helps you with your academic career. But to what end do we make these design moves? And what you begin to discover is that these do participate in public discourse. They participate in the transformation of value in neighborhoods, or the perception of value in neighborhoods. And with that comes quite a bit of baggage, because they begin to inflect the political realities of place. So yeah, we've learned quite a bit from launching the spaceship. And ultimately we learned that prior to making image, probably 80 to 90% of our effort now goes into designing governance systems and ways that people will actually relate to the thing made later and to the ownership of the space that contains the thing, rather than designing the thing.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the students had questions along these lines, which is, what is the role of the architect in these power relationships? You know, how can you use that role to undermine it, you know, undermine these problems? And so I think, you know, in a way, without losing the expertise that one has as an architect, you know, you and Jean-Louis have definitely taken on that problem head on. And like you said, it's a thorny and complex one, and I don't think it has an easy or singular answer. Especially, I think year to year, what that answer is also changes, you know? So, I mean, this is 2016, right?
This is 2016, yeah. So, you know, this is the kind of climax of placemaking as a solution to equitable redevelopment in communities. So this is where foundations, through various modes of tax evasion, are beginning to fund projects that are experimental and culturally driven. So this definitely marks a kind of relationship to producing image in otherwise difficult to read spaces, but that's funded through economies of corporate economies nonetheless. And for us, it's, you know, that's another thing, like, where does the money come from? Who is sponsoring these things? To what end? What modes of power are they concealing? What are they attempting to instigate? And what is your political alibi in working on these projects? And can you still benefit from resources while following your own political intuition? It's a huge challenge.
Yeah. I mean, this is a fantastic conversation. I want to get through a few more scenes while respecting your time and not going too far over. We're at 2 o'clock right now. Do you have a few more minutes on it, or do you
I
need to?
do. If everyone's bored, don't worry. I won't feel bad.
Oh, bored. I could do this for like an hour. We also have class to conduct, and I really want the opportunity to unpack this in our discussion sections with our students. So you've given us a lot already, but Ishan, can we move to the next scene, please?
Oh my gosh. This
Can
is where I'm like oversized again.
Yeah. Talk about power relationships.
Yeah, oof.
Here's what's nice.
Yeah.
This one though is I can hide. Anya,
Oh, can I hide?
God. Ah, this is really good.
well, Anya, do you want to introduce this project? It kind of brings together quite a few of the things we've been talking about, I think.
Yeah, this is the set for the Detroit African Funkestra, which we designed by looking at a number of vanguard small-scale music institutions in the North End and in Detroit that were at risk of disappearing. So really, this is a kind of conceptual preservation project. We sampled the colors of their stages and the shapes of their stages and then made a hybrid mashup. Here, secretly, we were thinking about Derrida and his hauntological approach to semiotic meaning making. The idea that if you create a series of symbols, even if you can't quite identify what they're referencing, it doesn't matter. It's going to create a sense of continuity and empathy in audiences that have a connection to place. So we were just playing with this idea. We first launched the scenography at the Oakland Avenue Urban Farm in Detroit. And then we were invited to do an installation at the Saint-Étienne Biennale in France in 2017. And here it just, again, the tactical operation here was, okay, this is really great. Who doesn't want to be in a Biennale? Like, that's very exciting. There must be good parties associated with that. But like, what's the point of making more objects that represent the objects that we make in communities in order to just tell the story of what great designers we are? How can we hack this? So what we figured out was that we basically decided not to build anything new. We transported all of our objects, the motherships, the scenography for the Detroit African Funkestra to Saint-Étienne by getting a corporate entity. Ooh, sorry. Sorry.
Hi, Ziggy.
Yeah. So we just transported the things, but then we used all of our resources to fundraise additional money to be able to bring everyone that we had worked with in the North End to the Saint-Étienne Biennale in order to represent themselves in their own narratives. So in the end, we figured out, our sentiment was that this stuff can't speak for itself, and it doesn't make sense without the programming and without the kind of creative energy of partners. And so we turned to just transporting everyone. In the end, we brought 40 people with us to the Biennale.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that many people. That's incredible.
It was a lot of people.
And I'm assuming that they all participated in programming here at the
participated in programming, and they did all kinds of workshops and performances throughout the Biennale. And then we, my partner Jean-Louis, organized a tour. So they went on tour through France to Paris and other cities and like really up the ante on visibility. But we also, we brought, some people who participated were farmers, others were real estate agents. We brought a yoga instructor. It was like the full entourage of people that we worked with to make these projects possible. So it wasn't solely the performers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can go to the next scene, Ishan. Sorry to rush through these, Anya. I know there's a lot to talk about with all of them. Yeah. Oh, you have to pee.
Where'd Anya go? There she is.
Always so big.
You're so big, and I'm always so dark. I'm like in shadow for some reason. I don't know. I have all my lights on.
We had to we creatively worked with the Head and Shoulders scale versus our full
Great.
green screens, you know. So
Awesome.
I'll give Ishan credit. This was all Ishan's idea to put you inside the door.
It's genius.
So tell us about this one.
So this is a clip-on architecture. It's an ephemeral institution, and it's an arts council. So this was created with by working with a group of artists in Detroit that were very, very upset that there was no arts council and that there is no arts council in Detroit, and they wanted to make a case for its importance. So what we ended up designing was this kind of very visible, slightly gaudy, ephemeral clip-on architectural arch that was ornamented by using pieces of architecture from Detroit, contemporary arts, objects, flora and fauna, and of course, objects from Sun Ra's Space is the Place. And we hybridized all of those. Again, this is like a piece that's made of 17 units that kind of all jigsaw puzzle together, so you can transport it easily, and you can transform any underused architecture or under-resourced space and give it pomp and circumstance for an ephemeral institutional project. So once we would clip this onto a building, in this case, the garage in the north end, we would host events where artists would get together and hold conferences and conversations about what an arts council for Detroit might look like and how they would want to organize it. So that was the idea here. Again, like, how can architecture as a symbolic form carry the meaning of a collective enterprise and produce the possibility, however ephemeral, of an alternate urban reality.
But it's partly about, or in addition to producing the collective meaning, it's also, I mean, there's an act of like legitimation that's happening, right? Or like it anoints power, let's say, to that institution simply by its materiality and its scale and its symbolic imagery. Yeah,
absolutely. And
so.
you know, again, this is the trick here, is that the material is vacuum formed plastic that's hand gilded with like spray paint, essentially. But from a distance, scenographically, this looks like it could have been quite the expensive artifact. And that's its goal. You know, its goal is to look like there's more investment than what is actually currently possible. So there's like it's a projective call toward legitimation. And it's an instant where we began to think that architecture, you know, again, it's a naive project and an optimistic one, where architecture still carries the tone of its political possibilities, and it attempts to include everyone.
I mean, we don't have time for it today, so we'll have to do it another time. But I feel like there's a whole other conversation, or we could branch from here into a conversation about like new forms of value, or like what how you derive value, or the role architecture has in maybe producing value or perceived value. And I mean, now a personal interest of mine and Tom's in our work is, you know, the role of materiality and the image of materiality in that value system. So the fact that this project like trades on the luxury of gold, but is made from cheap materials and paint that you can get at your hardware store, you know, feels like, so, I mean, it's apropos, I think, for the moment that we're in. So it's cool.
We should have a conversation about that. I can't wait.
Also now, because you're in it, it's starting to become like a headpiece as well, like a theatrical headdress.
This is a little Janelle Monáe over here a little bit, if I get it right.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, to that point though, it also serves the purpose that anytime you want the world to pay attention to you, anything anyone writes about you these days, there will be an image, like
Mhm.
in the magazine, you know, in the on the website, in the blog post, on the Instagram post. Like there's just no avoiding it. So unless you want to like, cultivate your cult of personality and you know
Mhm.
have an image stand in for your mission, like there has to be some image of the thing. And I
Yeah.
think intelligently like produces an image for an institution that wants to be, you know. Otherwise, it has to be the people trying to instigate it who have to stand in for it because they have to put a picture. There has to be a picture, right? So
I think you bring up something extraordinarily important, which is in many ways, this kind of practice allows us to occupy identities that normally aren't attributed uh, to to. It allows us to transcend the identities ascribed to us by social norms. So it allows us to participate pluralistically with people from a plethora of different backgrounds and with a plethora of different constituents, precisely because our image doesn't precede us as a cult of personalities. You know, we no one knows what we look like. It's a, you know, we don't belong to the space often where we work. But these images are often appropriated by a number of people who identify with the thing that we've built. So it's an interesting thing that you bring up.
well, let's go to the last scene.
Okay.
I want to talk about what yeah, what you've been doing with Jacob and Ishan, uh,
Mhm.
and in this case, the car center, but
Mhm.
also what the students are doing right now. You know, in their rep course, which we're in right now.
Uh-huh.
So I guess I just want to start with this, the kind of digital scenographic. I feel like your role as the associate dean of academic initiatives
Mhm.
when we had to go all online, like your practice and your thinking dovetailed pretty well to our new reality. And so I think this kind of stuff just seems like a pretty seamless transition of the things you've been working on into a digital space. So I just wanted to hear from you about this. And also, I wanted to hear if you had any kind of advice or insight or comments on, you know, for the students about the project they're working on now and what issues they should be thinking about when, you know, we're all basically being forced to produce an image of ourselves.
Mhm.
However casual we want it to be, we're still making choices about what's behind us, you know, what we look like, what we wear. Like these are all choices we make, whether or not, you know, we think we're making them consciously. So yeah, it's a two-parter. Let's talk about the space we're in, and then you can help those students some insights and guidance on making a digital environment for their own like self-presentation.
I mean, first I want to just celebrate the students that worked on this project with the car center. It's a 6-week project. It's amazing. The
Huh.
the car center is delighted. They're over the moon. They think this is the best thing. And
Oh no.
what?
Oh, I think I'm freezing. Maybe it's not you.
Oh,
Oh,
You're not,
you.
Anya's fine. Yeah.
oh, okay, okay. My hotspot's working. Yeah. So first, huge bravo to the students that worked on this at lightning speeds. It's a giant group. Aishan was part of it. Um, and the relationship with the car center has been ongoing. You know, since 2012, they have supported a number of fellowships for students at Taubman College that were also scenographic, but they were physically manifested. And we've worked with them on a number of installations. So it's amazing to see this shift into the digital world. But it comes with the same kind of astute thinking about the culture of place, what's being hosted as program, how the container inflects the possibility of giving new meaning to the curatorial objects, how this can be appropriated by the actors that are part of the organization, how this can include a multiplicity of audiences, how those audiences might communicate. So for me, when I saw this taking shape, I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is like the kinds of attributes of vibe from Situation Studio married to the scenographic opportunities that inflect political discourse that have been present in my work and teaching and at the college and more broadly. And it continues a relationship with a community partner and arts organization that that illustrates how when you have a very strong relationship and an honest one, something novel and fabulous invariably happens and takes place. So delighted with the results of that. It also illustrates how our students are able to make very direct impact quickly and create environments that are pluralistic and that appeal to broad audiences. So this, for me, it's a fabulous illustration of how this kind of stuff can work. If there's, as we sign off, if there's one thing that I would, first of all, I love the idea of the project that y'all are working on. And how the scenographic backdrop of a Zoom can begin to lay claims to our constructed identities. I would just encourage everyone to take pleasure in the oscillation between what we believe to be our individual identities and their collective impacts. And that's, being able to sort of dwell in that self-reflective space of what constructs us and laying bare the elements that make up who we believe we are and how we project ourselves. I think that's such an exciting proposition to be working on.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Anya.
Thank you.
And thank you to Ishan, who's in the background making all this happen.
Yay.
Yeah, thank you, Ellie. And thanks for
Thank you, Tom.
bearing this. This will be a new format, everybody. We're going to do about, I think, 5 or 6 more of these. Where we're going to have a guest, and we're going to have this kind of conversation in these, invented scenarios. So, yeah, thanks again, Anya. And to the students, we will just meet in our section Zooms and we'll conduct class.
Such an unceremonious way to end. Well, we'll meet in our Zoom room.
I mean, there's still a little bit of, logistics and housekeeping of, digital.
I know.
But,
Welcome to 2020. Bye, Anya. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
This was amazing. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Okay, I've stopped streaming now.
Oh, thank you, Ishan. That was amazing.
Yeah,
Sean,
that
thank
came
you
out
so
really well.
much. Yeah.
That was awesome. That was it. It looked great. Or even on Twitch, we had I think about 64 viewers throughout. And normally, when it comes to this thing, like keeping the viewership the same is hard. So it was great. Everyone was there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yep. And if there are a couple of points that I'm going to note down now, and whenever for the next prep lecture, whenever we need to talk about it, I'd love to talk about that. Things I realized while it was going on.
Yeah. So Tom, I have a email going with Ishan about lecture prep and proposing a couple times to meet, but maybe